I understand the fear of new technology because, I think that's an adaptive trait for human beings, to be afraid of new things because sometimes new things can be threatening. But one of the things that we can consider with AI is that AI at this point, it can be a tool for human beings, but human beings cannot be a tool for AI. That's most likely not going to happen, or at least human beings are going to try very hard to prevent that from happening. But at this stage, AI is a tool that you can work in a collaborative way to augment the abilities you have as a person, and you never know how far that can take you. And so when you look at it in that way, I think that it can kind of reduce some of the fear that it's a tool that can help us, but not vice versa.
Welcome to the Imagine AI Live podcast. I'm your host, Chris Madden, and today we have with us Matthew Guggemos, who is the CEO and founder of iTherapy. And I'm very excited to talk with you today because you're working with this technology that's trying to improve language development and helping people with language deficiencies, such as speech impediments, something that I struggled with as a kid. And I'm very excited to talk with you.
Well, I'm excited to talk about it with you. It's an interesting topic, and AI is a great use case for communication practice, in my opinion.
Well, let's dive into what is iTherapy.
I started with another speech pathologist named Lois Brady. So both of us working as speech pathologists, kind of contracting with different companies and such. But we both focused on autism. And around the time that the iPad came out, we didn't really like the technology that was available. And we often noticed that both of us separately noticed that it just didn't seem to capture the kind of things that you need to be able to do to communicate functionally, like pushing buttons, giant array of buttons and confusing user interfaces. Started talking about using entertainment-based technology and then recontextualizing it for communication. And so what we did is we worked with this company, which we still work with to this day, that used to be Motion Portrait, now called Upright. And we developed this app called InnerVoice. And so InnerVoice uses an avatar that's animated, and it can animate pictures, it can animate photographs. And then the idea behind it was to make a video modeling that shows you what to be able to do. And then with that, we're kind of hypothesized it would activate your mirror neuron system. So we started the company to make these alternative communication apps. And then we started our own private practice, and we connected the two companies. So we have a private practice that offers services to insurance companies and school districts and state level programs. And then we make this technology. And what we do is we make the technology and have our clinicians try it, and then have the patients and clients try it themselves and give us feedback. So it's been designed by not only us, but by our clinicians who work for us, and then also autistic individuals or people with communication challenges. And then as we kind of developed this over the years, iTherapy, we started getting National Science Foundation grants, Small Business Innovation Research grants, they're called SBIRs or SBIRs. So we did an NIH study of the SBIR program using VR, and that was kind of an interesting project for autistic kids. And then we also, our first grant was funding the ability to synthesize emotional communication to teach people with communication delays, and particularly autism. Now, recently have gotten a phase 2 SBIR grant through the National Science Foundation to develop AI-based and machine learning-based speech and language evaluation system. And so what we've done is over the years, there's two branches. One is the technology wing, and the other is the services wing. And then they kind of work together. The services help inform how the products function. And then we can use cases and problems from the clinicians and the clients and try to design technology to address that. And then we got in with AI about 6 years ago with Microsoft as part of the AI for Accessibility program. So we're kind of like one of the early adopters of AI. So we integrated computer vision and also their early version of a chatbot that we programmed. And since then, we've moved on to integrating computer vision through OpenAI APIs and then ChatGPT 4.0. And so we just kind of, over the years, iterate the things we've been working on and kind of have the two branches work together to come up with new ideas and technology.
Wow, very, very cool. And I love that services and the technology side of it, where you're building this cool technology and you're also in there making sure people know how to use it and helping people directly. That sounds great. People with autism, how would they use your product?
The app InnerVoice that one, what we like to use for that is a few cases that we kind of build it around this Bloom-Leahy model of language, which is there's content, form, and use. So content's your vocabulary, form is the way that we put words together and like word endings and such. And then use is how do you incorporate language and context. And so what we try to do is have it to show each of those things. So for example, a person is learning just what things are called in their environment. I just went through this in Europe, so you can go around your house to take pictures of items and the avatar will explain to you what they are. And then one of the things we recommend is that, let's say if a child who's learning to speak, you can take a picture of themselves so they can see themselves completing a task and then they can imitate it, which is kind of in the form of video self-modeling. And so they can go around and take pictures of a dog, their chair, or the refrigerator, or even outside or an open door, and it will label those things so that they can see what the items in their environment are called, and they compare both with speech and text. And one of the reasons we really emphasize the use of text instead of icons and abstract symbols is that text is universal. I mean, it's not a lot of communication systems use like these kind of hieroglyph things that change from company to company. What we've emphasized is just using text. And so what they can do is they can take a picture of, let's say, an open door. They take a picture of it and then the avatar will look at the picture and then it will say an open door with park outside. And so then they can see that, okay, this thing I'm looking at is called this. And then here's what it looks like in writing. And the writing piece is really important for autism because many kids have something called hyperlexia, which is the ability to read text and understand text and how it, and even in many cases, some kids learn to know the phonological system or the phonics system by just watching videos and seeing text associated with videos. So we try to use the text to leverage hyperlexia to build a vocabulary system. And that's the content form and the content piece of that bubble. And then the other part is because you're loading items in your environment, the avatar, you can ask questions about it. It can say, do you want to talk about the open door? Do you want to talk about the park outside? And in that case, then you can work on conversations. And so that's one use case for it is just learning communication, just functional communication. What are things called in your environment? Like when we put words together, what order do they occur in? And if I ask you a question, how do I answer it? Or if the avatar asks me a question, how can I answer it? Or how can I maintain a topic and such? So it can work on all those sort of things in a really predictable, safe environment. So that's one piece. And then we also worked with some autistic individuals and they asked for something that would help them practice job interview skills. So you can practice job interviews as well. So you can use it to just work on, hey, I'm applying for a job as a software engineer or a quality control person. Help me practice answering questions so that I can get the job. And it'll do that kind of stuff as well. So that as a person who's autistic, those are some of the ways that you can use it.
That sounds really, really fascinating. And I've got two follow-up questions. One, at what age do you need an adult or a facilitator that's also there to help them use the app properly so that they don't get distracted maybe? The second question is, have you thought about using this for people learning other languages? Everything you just described there sounds like it would be amazing for me here in Korea to learn Korean if I had something that could just describe everything I'm seeing and help me put sentences together.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of one of the models that we've taken. It's a little bit unusual, but one of the things we've kind of thought about with autism, with learning to speak is rather than think of it as like, okay, there's some sort of, it's only a disorder or just looking at it as some sort of something negative, pathologizing it. Obviously people have to learn to communicate to be able to socialize and work in the world. But if you take the perspective as, well, we're just trying to learn to speak a language, just like what you're talking about. It can also speak, and you can ask it to do all this stuff in a different language. And in fact, someone asked me recently, can it answer in Greek? And so it will answer in Greek, or you can do it. And I was just in Spain. And so I was taking pictures and having it translate from Basque into English. And as long as you tell it, hey, if I say something in Basque or write something to you in Basque for you to repeat in English, it can do that too. I chose Basque because I think it's a super cool language, but it can do it in a number of languages, and it could very well, be used for people trying to learn a second language. And the other piece that I think can also help with that, whether you're autistic or you're a person who's neurotypical and you're just trying to learn to speak a language, is it can make content that's interest driven. So you can take a picture of something you're interested in, like a Ferrari. Hey, I want to talk about Ferraris in Korean. And so It could, as long as you tell it that, and then you take pictures, you could practice. And that's a huge piece to autistic education. And also, I think just education in general. If something's appealing to someone's interest, then it's easier to keep talking about things that you're interested in as opposed to talking about things you're not interested in. So that's one of the reasons why we incorporate avatar. You can make the avatar, you can be talking to, an alien, or you could be talking to whatever, a drawing that you made. And then you could be talking about stuff that you're uniquely interested in. And that's a great way to practice communication. I mean, most people don't want to talk about boring things they're not interested in. So that's one way that InnerVoice was built, is to try to capture interest-driven learning and then try to get you to work on communication around it. So, and that applies to anyone. I mean, if you're neurotypical or you're neurodivergent.
Yeah, definitely. The motivation is a key factor when learning anything, especially languages. The first part of the question, just at what age is this ideal for? And do you need like assistance? I know that's a problem in schools today, is that it's so reliant on screens, and you just let kids use screens to their own devices and they'll be off the app that they're supposed to be on and doing something else, and they get distracted really easily, right? I'm wondering what you do to prevent that.
That's a good question. For very young kids and the kids who are having a hard time noticing communicative intent, or who are struggling with joint attention, for example, if I'm referring to something and pointing at it and calling it something, then I guess we wouldn't recommend InnerVoice. But like you said, we often say that words and context that are just on Post-it notes, and then you can try to solve problems with language in the environment through Post-it note, not necessarily on the screen first. If that doesn't work, then okay, well then we can try using InnerVoice. But what we recommend is that an adult set something called guided access. And this is for a very young kid. And guided access can prevent them from, we could kind of call it digital eloping, just constantly changing screens, just changing. And we've seen that a lot. And it's very hard to learn anything that way. Like if you're watching a demonstration of a skill and then it keeps getting changed repeatedly, it's hard to internalize it so that you can imitate that thing that you're watching. So what we recommend is, if you're going to use it in this way, what you can do is set guided access. And this is a feature on iOS, and I'm less skilled with Android, but there's also a feature on there. I can't remember what it's called, but it can prevent you from constantly switching the screens. But Apple's particularly good for this. And so we often teach parents, here, put it on this screen and then set it for this amount of time to practice, rather than just here, let them have unfettered access forever and they're just kind of using a screen. The idea behind the app, though, is that you try to make it be obsolete. What we're trying to do is capture attention. And then, so first you get the person's attention, directed at. Maybe it's the screen. Maybe they want to talk to a dragon. And then from that point, start fading the use of it on the screen and then integrating it into physical world. So we want the app to be used only temporarily so that you can learn to communicate with people in your environment, not use the app and just, only focus on the content on the screen. So, because screen time for kids, particularly, I'd say unsupervised screen time, it seems to be the culprit, where you're just changing all the time and scrolling and not watching things in their entirety. Been shown not to be good for child development at all, for communication development particularly. So we try to first recommend natural interventions. And then if that doesn't work, the reason we recommend using this is because you can make it be very interest driven to work on functional communication if you're using it with younger kids.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's hard enough as adults keeping focused on all these different screens and just thinking with the kids. And yeah, I mean, we were fortunate to be raised in a society that didn't have smartphones, and it's such a different world for these young kids. With your product and generative AI wave we've been on for about a year and a half now, how's your product staying cutting edge with all of these advancements in AI?
Well, in this case, the one we're talking about here is for practicing communication. We're using LLMs, particularly in this case for InnerVoice, we're using GPT-4o. And then what we also are incorporating is stable diffusion for our autism screener, that we've machine learning based autism screener and data collection system. And then also for the evaluation system we're also using LLM. And what we try to do, and this kind of a philosophy we have, particularly with autism, we try to use the latest, best technology and really make it bespoke use case for autism. Because a lot of times what we've seen in the past is that technology that gets recommended for autistic individuals, maybe they're not using the most cutting edge thing. And so that's been our philosophy, is to use whatever's come out the latest and see if we can integrate it into the technology we're using. So right now for National Science Foundation project, the autism screener, we're again using that interest-driven piece to collect language samples. And we have independent review board approval to be able to collect language samples and create a data set to train our system to screen for autism. And that should be released in the next, maybe either today or by the end of the week. And what we're using is a DALL-E 3 for that. And what we have as an option is to be able to collect a language sample of a child speaking. We can just ask the parents to enter a couple things the kids are interested in. So maybe they're into rhinos, maybe they're into UFOs, and then it'll make a picture of rhinos and UFOs. Or if they're into trains, then they're into trains that are made of carbon fiber, well, then, it'll do that. And which obviously in the past, what we used to do as clinicians, because I'm also a licensed speech pathologist, I would try to draw this stuff, but trying to draw carbon fiber on a train. I'm like half decent sketcher, but it falls short of expectations. So we've been using the best model, in my opinion, the one I've used that I like the best is DALL-E 3 for stable diffusion. And it's really interesting. It'll derive or get kids to speak a lot more when it's about the things they're interested in. And we had our clinicians try this too. So it wasn't like, hey, let's see if it works. So we just had a number of our clinicians who work with us try this out in sessions just to see, does it elicit more speech and language? So that's one of the things that we have been using. And then also we've been using AR lenses, and that's another piece. So during a conversation, use AR lenses to change the environment or do something funny or something weird. And then that'll get the kids to talk as well. So we try to make it try to use AI in a way that's fun and kind of use it in a natural way rather than just kind of forcing it into something or not sure why we're using it. And then we use it in a way we get a lot of feedback from the end users and also the clinicians who are using it. So as for the LLMs, we always test which one has the best performance, which one hallucinates the least, which one works the most efficiently and doesn't cost too much or have the most token cost for its use as well. So
you talked about AR glasses there. Which AR products are you using for the glasses? And then how does that look like from the user's perspective? Are words appearing near objects, describing them, or what?
In this case, the AR lenses, well, I just call them lenses, but they're filters over the camera on the device. So what we'll do is we'll use the device that maybe a laptop computer or maybe it's an iPad or something. And this is for evaluation. If we're trying to get an evaluation, what we want to do is get a sample of a person talking. And for kids, what we try to do is do things that imitate what you would look like, what would happen in a natural speech and language setting. So like you're saying, we do use words. I really like to put words displayed on the screen. You can interact with them and point. That's one way we've used them. So we'll put words, which you can't do in a face-to-face conversation. You just can't have a word floating above you. And we also will do kind of things like, I used to use a lot of bags. I would take bags and put weird things in them, like wind-up toys, or I always try to get things that kids didn't see very often. And I'd sort of, open the bag and say like, hey, you see something in there? And they'd say, what is it? See, now I got them to talk because they're interested. So we would try to get things that are strange or sort of funny. And then there's the reason to talk about it. We've been trying a couple of different products. We talked to Snap and about using some of their technology. And there's another smaller company we started looking at as well that had some great technology. But we often try to use things that are kind of surprising or something funny, because people will talk more when something's funny or surprising. And then again, I'm a big fan of the words floating around. Back to the why we don't use lenses. During the pandemic, we did a human subject study for virtual reality goggles. And we 3D printed them and incorporated bone conduction headphones that were Bluetooth paired with the device. And then it displayed motor speech movements and everything. Because it was the pandemic, we had to do it remotely, which was at the time we were kind of like, oh my gosh, we had to completely change our study design. But it actually helped us a lot because we could see how do people interact with complicated devices and interfaces. And then also for young kids, putting goggles on, they did not like it. And we try to develop these things as ergonomically as possible and try to make them light and counterbalance the weight on them and we use the bone conduction so nothing would go in the kid's ears. Where there's too hard, parents were kind of frustrated trying to pair the Bluetooth and the kids didn't want them on their face. So we found for the young kids that the lenses didn't work as well. So instead, we've been focusing on, if we're going to use AR, put it on the actual camera of the device. But we need to do, more research into this to see as these devices get better and they maybe get lighter and less intrusive, maybe they could be an option as well.
Yeah, definitely. Let's kind of turn towards the future of this technology. And maybe we can start just with AI in general. Like, how do you think AI is going to disrupt education?
I can focus on special education first because that's what I have the most experience in. So for at least the product we're working on called the Evaluative Artificial Speech Intelligence Autism Screeners. I mean, the acronym spells out as easy as. How it will impact education as we are looking to reduce workload for educators and intervention. Because what's happening now, particularly in special education, is an enormous amount of workload that teachers, special education teachers, speech pathologists, OTs, school psychologists, they're increasingly weighted down with administrative tasks, and many of which are not reimbursed. And I know this because, I've done this as a case manager, and then my wife's special education teacher for autism TK classrooms. And people are constantly taking home work, and then they're just I'd say an enormous percentage of their energy is being spent on non-reimbursed administrative tasks that either happen during this day and especially at night. How that impacts education is it's leading to clinician and educator burnout. They're leaving the field, or they have less time to spend on actual interventions that will work for increasing communication development or, teaching academics. I think AI has a huge capacity, particularly instrumented AI. I'm a big fan of using AI as an instrument to augment your abilities, but particularly to reduce workload to a manageable amount so that you can focus on the job you thought you were going to have. A lot of people go into education because they want to teach people, or speech pathologists go into the field because they want to help people communicate. And what they end up finding is that the majority of your energy and time and focus and thinking is about the administrative tasks that are associated with the jobs. And that's driving people away from the field, which is terrible because there's a huge increase and, post-pandemic of people and children with communication delays. And there's an expanding population of individuals who are autistic. So I think that can impact education quite a bit. AI used as a way to manage workload and to reduce administrative tasks that are driving people's attention away from actually educating.
Yeah, wow. I totally see your point there, and how AI should be reducing the workload and all this kind of menial tasks from teachers, and allow them to spend more time with humans, allow them with the students that they're trying to help. That's great. Why is autism increasing?
Well, there are a number of factors. I mean, I don't think anyone has one pure and simple answer. I think that there could be a number of reasons for it. I think one area I'd like to see more research get looked into or directed at is societal change. The way that we live our lives, the way that we are spending more time on screen, maybe the food we eat, and the pace at which we live our lives. Our schedules are compressed, and there's no time for play and exploration. And I think children are living lives that have never looked this way throughout the course of human history. I mean, if you think back that human beings are neurophysiologically the same as they were 200,000 years ago or so. I mean, if you were living in the Basque region 150,000 years ago, let's pick that because I was just reading about that at the museum. Your brain literally was very similar in terms of having a prefrontal cortex, a frontal cortex, a sensory, motor sensory strip, all that. But what was different about how people lived then is, people were talking to each other, they were using their hands, they were walking around in environments, they're smelling things, they're hearing things behind them, they're working on skills, and there's less of that. I mean, I'm not saying this is the cause of autism, but I mean, since we are not living that way as much, is it possible that because we're not living that way, that it's causing developmental trajectories that are very different than they have been in the past? And the thing about autism too is, you can be autistic and have a great life and be a billionaire, or you can, be a father or a husband or a wife or whatever. I mean, a pilot. It's just a way of being in the world. But I feel like if you're not given the right opportunities and support and education and environments to thrive in, that's when it becomes particularly more challenging. But I don't necessarily the trend is that autism is not necessarily a disorder, but if you're not given the right supports, it's harder to thrive, and I guess that's, I don't know if that had kind of answered it in like a number of different ways, but that's just my hypothesis.
And another thing to clear up in my head is the autism spectrum. Is Asperger's on one side and then autistic is on the other, or how does that work?
Well, interestingly, a while back in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, or DSM-5, they removed Asperger as a diagnosis, and instead it just kind of wrapped in with autism. So, but typically, people who are kind of labeled as having Asperger syndrome had maybe social challenges, but then early language development. So they'd often develop language early on, or often would be described as having pedantic language, kind of like almost like little professors at a young age, and they were very focused on topics they wanted to talk about, but they didn't necessarily have the language delays initially, but maybe also they have sensory challenges and other things that are also associated with autism. Whereas you can have, at the other spectrum, you can have non-speaking individuals who are autistic. But there are plenty of non-speaking individuals who are graduating from college and then they're writing books and stuff. That because of the sensory motor aspect of their condition, they are not able to produce connected speech, but they can type and then communicate. Because I think a lot of times people forget that speech is not the only form of communication. Writing at this point, I think writing has overtaken speech in terms of the primary way people communicate. People don't want to take a phone call. They want you to text them. So non-speaking individual, if they get access to keyboards and get access to a way to create connected speech through text, they can do great too, but there are more challenges initially if you're non-speaking or you have challenges with motor speech, as opposed to Asperger's syndrome, those folks often don't have that problem with language development. And that was kind of in general. There's always exceptions.
The American Society for AI, what is that?
Well, a new organization started by a group of individuals, and then they're really trying to just use AI for good and to try to monitor how AI is being used and encourage the use of it for public benefit and for the benefit of humanity. I guess that sounds kind of like this lofty, oh my gosh, sounds not very achievable or even melodramatic, but they actually are doing it. These guys are great who put this together. The collection of people that they've been able to curate, and they've kept it as a small group. And I was lucky enough to be invited when it just started, probably because we got started with AI early on with Microsoft. And then I've dabbled in it. I made a lot of chatbots and the stuff that we've talked about too. And they asked me to be part of it because of maybe the use cases, because we're using AI as a diagnostic tool, a workload management tool for healthcare individual or healthcare use cases, and then for practicing communication. Very different from this terrible kind of dystopian use case for AI that we hear a lot. So often people, when I tell them we're working in AI, and in fact, I want to say for the record, I don't even like the term AI. I think it's a terrible term because most people don't like artificial things, and intelligence is, we're still trying to figure out how to measure that. And I have a little story about that. I just got elected to the Mensa Board of Trustees, and we're kind of looking at, well, what makes someone intelligent? It's not just IQ, So the idea that we're using like the word intelligent and then we're prefacing it with artificial. If I ask someone, do you want some artificial strawberries or do you want natural strawberries? Most people are not going to go for the artificial strawberries, but we're using the term AI. And I think it immediately evokes negative dystopian Matrix, Terminator kind of Doom scenarios in people. And they always tell me, when I say always, I'm trying to think of when this doesn't happen. Well, I want to trust AI, and I'm like, it sounds terrible. It's something like that most of the time. And the American Society for AI, their goal is to recontextualize AI. I guess that's the term we're going to have to stick with. I personally like automation or machine learning much better, but we're trying to show that it can be used for these things that we're talking about. It can be used for communication, it can be used for diagnostic, or it could be used for engineering, problem solving, all these sort of things that help people. And they've collected all these folks from all over the world, different backgrounds, to try to help with that goal. That's my understanding of it. But they have their own publicity statement, but it's largely something along those lines.
Yeah, you're definitely right that the PR for AI could be better. And I'm welcome to some different terms. I mean, Gen AI, generative art, but yeah, it's still the same. So many people from like the creator community give a lot of pushback because when something's threatening your way of life or your livelihood, it is a very repulsive thing that you want to get away from you don't like. So at the same time, it's moving so quickly and expanding so much into every part of life and society that people got to get used to it too. But yeah, maybe we can think of some other term for it. You talked about how AI is going to help a lot from the administrator perspective, from the teachers, from the practitioner, but more from the learner's perspective. Like, what is a world of in the future where everyone's got this AI buddy at their fingertips? What does that mean for education?
Well, I would say for education and then for activities of daily living, just things you do, regularly. And even for neurodivergent people, because I mean, I could say this for the record, I have Tourette syndrome and I have a lot of issues with sensory stuff too. And so if I go to the airport, I mean, it is really hard for me, but I love to travel. But I mean, all of it is a lot. I use AI to help me, here I am using the term that I was just criticizing, but I'll use LLMs to help me to get through traveling. I'll put my itinerary in first, and then I use ChatGPT 4.0. I'll go and I'll find, okay, where's my flight? If I'm kind of overwhelmed from the sounds and all that, I'm searching, I can't find the item on the flight board. I can take a picture of it and say, where's my flight? When is it leaving? And it'll find it right away for me. Or where I'm in this wing, where am I supposed to go? And it'll tell me where to go. And I've done this because that's how I got to the AI conference for the American Society for AI. Well, I could say for neurodivergent people, it can be an extremely helpful assistant, especially if you're in these kind of environments where the sensory input is too much for you to just filter out, where you need to narrow down to the things you need to focus on to help you get through to accomplish your goal. But it's getting to a flight, catching a bus, whatever it is, finding where you are in a city. So that's one use case. For learners, what it can do is it can help with brainstorming. Let's say if you hear a term in a class, or let's say you're taking a class and the teacher mentions a term, and maybe, if it's a physics class, they say the word fulcrum. What is that? And so you can use conversational interfaces. And again, I'll use ChatGPT because I think right now they kind of have the best interface, in my opinion, for these sort of things, like as an assistant. We can say, hey, let's talk about what fulcrum is and explain it to me, by applying it to drums or applying it to skiing or or something I'm interested in. And then explain it to me in a way, like as if I'm a third grader or if I'm a fifth grader or whatever it is. I mean, let's keep talking about it until you're convinced I understand. And then I can learn complex concepts through a conversation. And within the conversation, you can say, hey, could you make a picture of a fulcrum? I can't visualize it. And so now, not only do you have a conversation, but from the conversation, you can create imagery. And what I'm really hoping for is the text to video kind of stable diffusion could help with even more of those concepts. I think more abstract concepts that people maybe in the past felt they couldn't learn, like math or maybe history or whatever it is, some things that involve memorization or things or skill sets that they don't come as easy to them. Conversational interfaces with these sort of LLMs will really, really help with learning, in my opinion, as a form of instrumented AI to augment the things that you can do, but maybe you need to have it, you need a bespoke educational experience. You can do that with AI. If you try to get a tutor to do this with you and follow you around 8 hours a day, you have to be a lot of resources for that. Whereas this can be something that functions in that way, and it can provide multi-sensory learning experiences. So that's my long-winded answer for how I actually think it could help a lot of learners and neurodivergent, and as well as the neurotypical people.
Oh, it's a very bright future that you painted out there. I know we're just on the cusp, and already I can use a lot of these AI tools to help myself learn Korean. And I'm kind of waiting for that AR glasses where I can walk around and speak with it. It's showing me things on the screen, typing out text, and it's not that far away, I don't think. So
no, it's not.
Well, Matthew, this has been very enlightening talking with you, and really cool to hear what you're working on and what you're doing to help so many people. Is there a final message that you'd like to say to our audience, and also where people can find you?
Yeah, well, I think I understand the fear of new technology because, I mean, I think that's an adaptive trait for human beings, to be afraid of new things because sometimes new things can be threatening. But one of the things that we can consider with AI is that AI at this point, it can be a tool for human beings, but human beings cannot be a tool for AI. I mean, that's most likely not going to happen, or at least human beings are going to try very hard to prevent that from happening. But at this stage, AI is a tool that you can work in a collaborative way to augment the ability that you have as a person, and you never know how far that can take you. And so when you look at it in that way, I think that it can kind of reduce some of the fear that it's a tool that can help us, but not vice versa. And so I hope that can kind of reduce some of the apprehension people would have to try it out. And then for where they can find me, we have a couple websites. We have our iTherapy LLC, and then we also publish the Autism Digest. You can find me there. My own personal stuff, on the side, I'm also a musician. I've played drums my whole life. And you can find me at Drum Language. And so I do a lot of stuff on Instagram, playing drums, and on LinkedIn. So my first and last name, Matthew Guggemos. And the last thing, Easy As, which is that EASI-AS.com. And that's where we are building our machine learning autism screener. So go and check that out.
Awesome. Well, I just looked you up on Instagram, Drum Language, and I'm following you now. Very cool what you're doing.
Oh, I had one last thing, InnerVoice app. So that's the other one. InnerVoice app is where the avatar-based AI thing.
Thank you so much, Matthew. It was a pleasure talking with you, and I hope to talk with you again.
Great. Thanks for having me. This has been great.